Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to this live stream, one that is actually starting on time, reasonably, for once. It's been a while, I think, since we had a stable internet connection, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. We're going to be joined by Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President of and co-founder of the Quincy Institute, a regular on the show, and someone I think who has been pretty apt at calling some of the bigger developments in the situation between the US, Iran, Israel, and the whole Middle East. And one of the things that I took away from what he said was simply about sort of China's role behind the talks. I think that was something we spoke about a week ago, and he basically was emphasizing the point that China has its fingerprints a lot more over these peace talks than people would like to admit, or that the Chinese would ever sort of admit. And while I might not have had the audacity to say it that bluntly, it's true. I think it's very true that the Chinese are not just sort of ignoring this or being on the sidelines. They are much more involved with this than people have said. But in the meantime, before Trita joins us, I wanted to sort of start on time because we are streaming to Substack, and Substack can be a bit fiddly with its timings. But the point is that we are doing more on there. So if you're interested in writing as well as YouTube and stuff, then do check out the I do more writing now, sort of deeper dives of some of the video essays that I share, or sort of reflections on some of the conversations. So you can sort of read what we talk about, but also see some of my personal views of what was said that I might not have raised during the conversation. But that aside, so right now we seem to have a bit of a merry-go-round is the word I use. It some people call stalemate. Some people just think it's a shit show. I like merry-go-round because it adds a certain humor to the sort of the description of a shit show, which it is still. But anyway, the point is that this peace process is not going anywhere very easily. Trump seems to think that he can capitulate the Iranians into doing what he wants, and as we keep emphasizing, that's not going to happen. The Islamic Republic is not Venezuela. It's not the same entity, and you have to accept that you're dealing with a very seasoned set of individuals. Again, this isn't necessarily an endorsement. It's funny how if you sort of recognize the capabilities of one side, people then interpret that as though sort of you support them, which I think is really lazy and also just completely untrue. The Iranians are exceptional diplomats, they're exceptional policymakers, but that doesn't mean that we like the diplomats. I saw one report just yesterday, actually, that Pezeshkian, the president, is tendering his resignation, which is huge if that's the case. It's just a case of him going to be stepping down. I don't see why he would do that unless he's being pressured or unless he sees this as some kind of real mess. But I am curious to hear what Trita has to say about that. I have plenty of water here for also the points where I have to speak more than when the guest is speaking. But yeah, so one news development is that Trita is that Pezeshkian is thinking of stepping down, and we've had the main topic is of course these airstrikes. Now, some people on other parts of the internet will say that this is the peace deal coming to an end, the ceasefire is on the verge of collapse, and in some ways it looks really fragile, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the end of it. You will often see that these kinds of situations, you will see violations occur. The Iranians and the Americans are going to take pot shots, is the best way I look at it, right? They will take potential, there will be flare-ups, there will be violations, there will be moments of complete concern that this is going to deteriorate into a complete and utter shit show. But that doesn't necessarily mean the case, because just because you have these pot shots doesn't necessarily mean that the entire agreement, whatever ceasefire, is unhinged. It takes a lot for the parties that agree to this to suddenly want to jeopardize it, right? The amount of energy they have spent into getting to this point of the ceasefire, they're not just going to blow that all away by saying, well, these our adversaries, our opponents violated it, therefore it's worth just destroying it, unless they're so ideologically driven, unless they are zealots in that way. If they're driven more by just a pure cause than sort of pragmatism, then they will maybe abandon it. But that's not the case with the Iranians. Whilst the IRGC, the Islamic Republic, is very ideological, it's increasingly more pragmatic, is one of the things we've said from the very beginning of this podcast or coverage of the war, is that the IRGC, the Islamic Republic more broadly, has become very pragmatic. And they're not going to throw away weeks of negotiations or talks, and especially the prospect of a more comprehensive agreement, because of the Americans striking a couple of targets. The long-term benefits outweigh the short-term benefits of striking, or sort of whatever. The desire for moral response, right? The moral outrage of being struck by the Americans is not worth the response. So in my mind, I think that you will see these flare-ups, but I don't think the ceasefire is going to completely deteriorate. Also, largely because both sides don't have the military capacity to do it right now. The Trump administration, there was one pretty mad report I read the other day, who said that the US was really like used half its stockpiles, or 25% or something, and that supplies to Europe and others had completely changed, that they were cutting provisions to all sorts of their supposed allies and NATO and so on. So that's a pretty big indication of the priorities of the US administration, and that really, despite Trump's rhetoric, he's not actually going to go back to war. And mind you, he even said earlier today that the peace talks were peace was progressing at a rapid pace, is I think what he said. So he wouldn't keep tweeting stuff like that unless he didn't really want it, right? At the end of the day, Trump's all about imagery, and if he keeps putting onus on where we're seeing this progress, then he'll just ignore it. So I am aware that Cheetah hasn't turned up yet. I'm not sure why. We did agree this about a few days back, so he should be aware of the time. The problem I've had is that we've had different time zones to manage, but he's also a busy guy and pretty popular, understandably. But I'm gonna I'll send him a quick message. But yeah, I'm kind of he should be here soon. I hope he's here soon, because I'm going to run out of things to say in the meantime. But yeah, I mean, look, I think the bottom line with all of this is here's one thing that I saw. So right now, the Israelis in Lebanon continue to be the primary trigger point for this war. The Iranians have said that this will be a deal breaker, but the two sides have continued to strike, as in Hezbollah and Israel, and nothing really has changed. The Trump administration, or Trump himself, said that he was going to keep in control Netanyahu, that he was in charge, and then Netanyahu can't really do anything. I think it was pretty clear to a lot of people who are fed up with the Israeli influencers in the US that sort of Trump was trying to demonstrate that he has control. But this is the key debate, and I'm trying to bring on a couple of more Israeli-orientated guests, or people who could speak to the Israeli perspective more, because their emphasis is that this is a US-led issue, and most people argue that this is an Israeli-driven or Israeli sort of encouraged effort. So, for example, earlier today, Iran did warn that the Israeli attacks against Hezbollah would threaten the ceasefire. I mean, they've said this several times. It's sort of similar to Trump, who's repeated himself. So have the Iranians. They've made threat after threat about ditching the ceasefire if the attacks on Lebanon continue, on Hezbollah continue, but they haven't left it. So they're as much, I think, talking hard but not actually following through. But the foreign minister Aragachi did say that this was violation on one front is a violation of the ceasefire on all fronts, which is sort of trying to take it sounds like the Article 5 rhetoric of the NATO alliance, right? An attack on one is an attack on all. I think that's quite interesting. But yeah, it's trying to sort of leverage that Western framing, that Western rhetoric. Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, had said earlier that terror targets in Beirut's Dahia would be hit in response to attacks by Hezbollah. So it's essentially just each one stating that the other is at fault. Trump said he had, quote, a very productive call with Bibi, and that there will be no troops going to Beirut, which I guess some people, what I found rather interesting was that some people thought that that meant American troops, but this is where the distinction, the argument came, which was that he's talking about Israeli troops. So Trump trying to flex that he's in charge of the of what happens overall across the Middle East, including with Israel's deployments and actions, versus other people who saw that that was just American troops going there, and Trump's just sort of clarifying America's position even more, which I don't think so. I think it's Trump's really, I think, trying to put his foot down in terms of this this idea that Netanyahu controls him or sort of is his puppet. I think that's quite interesting. Let's see what else that was said. Oh, okay. So he confirmed that Netanyahu confirmed that if Hezbollah does not stop, Israel will strike. But he said that the IDF will not go further than their operated southern Lebanon plans. So that's south of the river. I think this is all pretty bad. Anyway, we had a pretty blunt conversation. I was interviewed on Sunday. I think it was, I can't remember now. What was it? Where were we? What was I talking? Who was I talking to? I was on a Substack with a good friend of mine, Wajir, which was quite an interesting conversation. He basically just asked my opinions about it, and to be honest, I was pretty as blunt as I should have been from the beginning. Which whilst I don't I don't go as far as some people who blame Israel for everything. I think there's a pretty clear intention by the government to preemptively defend Israelis' interests, right? So this is the classic strategy where you claim there's a intended attack, or you're preempting an attack, and so you're going to defend by a preemptive strike, right? So you're going to strike because you feel that there's a threat. Now, we spoke quite a lot about Syria with Rajir, and the simple point was that the Golan Heights has been illegally occupied by the Israelis since the 1960s, and everybody in their right mind recognizes that's an illegal occupation. But the Israelis felt the need to extend that occupation by, well, occupying some more land in southwest Syria, right? That buffer zone that they created at the, I think it was early 2025. And that was essentially under the pretext that, well, we fear that the Syrian government under al-Sharaa will be attacking Israel, and therefore we have to take these preemptive measures to defend ourselves. That never materialized. We've not seen any indication that the Syrian army, whatever the groups, BTS, the main group that led the overthrow of Assad, there was no evidence to suggest that that was ever happening. And now, more than a year later, the Israelis still occupy that area. And now they're doing with Lebanon. So a lot of people fear or assume that this is sort of going to be, Israel's going to just sort of take this land and then just sort of sit there. And then over time, you're going to get settlements cropping up, and it's incrementally occupied through the sort of settling of native Israelis across the border. This sort of a slow form of occupancy and colonialism, if you like, even. But a lot of people don't like you saying that because they think it's incredibly anti-Semitic or anti-Israeli or something. But it's not, I think, anti-Semitic to recognize that the ultra-nationalist government of Israel has some pretty blunt opinions and goals. I think it was Ben Gvir or was it Smotrich, whichever two, the two that I often reference because I just think they're dastardly people, was that they do have this greater Israel in mind, right? This idea of creating Israel that occupies a large proportion of the Levant. Living space. Sort of what a space for more Israelis to sort of settle outwards and sort of they want to sterilize the land, sanitize it. They want to I think that's the word that's been used. They want to sanitize the land and gradually sort of turn it into more Israeli living space. So you gradually shift upwards and upwards a little bit, and then sort of by the time that you've already occupied that space, it's very hard to shift you. It's kind of what the Russians have done in Ukraine. They sit, they squat, they gradually dig in, and then there's very little you can do to oust them. And I think that these developments are even a little bit of a push for Trump. He has his concerns over the extent that the Israelis are willing to go in this situation. Now, to be honest with you, I don't think that the Israelis and Lebanon front is going to be a deal breaker in terms of the overall peace deal, but also the situation. The flare-ups between the IDF and Hezbollah have happened so many times. If the war with Iran wasn't happening and this was happening, it would be a horrible situation, but it wouldn't have the, I think, gravitas, unfortunately, that it would without this broader US-Iranian dynamic as well. We've seen that in the past year, that the Israelis are often making strikes. I think this, and I think that the severity, the magnitude of the Iranian-US peace deals, talks, is so high that it's overlooking a huge ground operation, right? Or maybe not huge, but significant. It's a big deal for the IDF, for the Israelis to be in South Lebanon as much as they are. But from the news that I read, it gets barely any mention. Even Al Jazeera, which is obviously heavily critical of Israel, they don't mention it as much. They just mention it in the broader context of the Middle East deterioration of the situation. But yeah, just looking here, the situation with the peace talks, I don't think it's going to go anywhere, to be honest with you. It's, as I say, people are going to make it out like it's some huge, massive situation that all things deteriorating, but maybe that's why I don't grow as fast as some other channels, because I'm unwilling to sensationalize things which are pretty. Well, it's pretty. There's not much happening, guys. I'm going to be honest. They're just talking back and forth. Some strikes happened yesterday. It's standard Middle East affairs, if I'm honest. I hate to say that. Not like the Middle East doesn't deserve some peace and quiet, but explosions, missile strikes, heavy-handed rhetoric. It's pretty standard for the Middle East in the past 25 years, isn't it? Really. So. Some people claiming that these strikes are going to sort of tip the balance of power or create the whole situation after February 28th. No chance. It's not the same level. It's ethnic cleansing. That's you could make a reasonable argument, and I think a lot of people had, that what is being attempted in many ways in that part of the west of the Middle East. That's bad English. Around the Levant, Lebanon, Israel, and so on, that is a form of ethnic cleansing. But that's what I would say. I mean, I'm just trying to look at some latest updates here, because again, it's very slow. Oil. So we had a really interesting conversation with Anis Abhajir last week. And oil prices have been going all over the place. But nothing compared to what they were. Brent was jumping, what, £10, $25, $20 every couple of days. It was going up and down. Now it's more like $5. So you can argue whether that's frustrating for the cost of average living, but they haven't been volatile as much since March, since the ceasefire, since the end of the full-scale military campaign in March. The situation has been unpredictable, but nowhere near the level of intensity that the US experienced, that the world experienced, I guess, more broadly. And that leads me actually to another video that I was going to say I'm going to post probably tomorrow, which is simply that, as I said before, some of you may have heard me say this, but as I said before, I think the single biggest thing that the United States, Trump specifically, has given Iran is strategic clarity. I think we shouldn't lie to ourselves that the IRGC is struggling. The economy is in a shit way. They have internal disputes, but are largely united around the fact that they need to survive. But unfortunately for them, or for the US, they have helped the Iranians realize that their single biggest asset isn't a conventional nuclear weapon. There's a theory or term known in sort of academia known as near nuclear nation or threshold. And in this case, Iran has been a near nuclear power for a while, in the sense it's been on the verge of developing the bomb. But at the same time, it hasn't got the means to deliver it yet. Now, speculations over the role of China or Pakistan in providing that technology. But I think it's pretty clear from China's very direct and overt statements that they don't really want Iran to be nuclear capable. Not even Russia does, because it gives you a certain leverage over your associate that you wouldn't otherwise have. So regardless of what the Russians say about them supporting Iran to the ends of the earth, that's not true, because they haven't done more than provide intelligence. They haven't provided arms, mainly because Putin can't spare them. But they could provide information on how to develop a nuclear warhead, but they haven't, because they don't want them to. I think that's pretty evident. But what I do think the Iranians have learned is that their actual nuclear option is the Strait of Hormuz. Now, some of you might think that and be like, well, that's bloody obvious. But it's not just a simple case of they control it and they can control the price of oil or certain commodities. They can literally directly harm the United States economy specifically. That's what I mentioned. Some of you might have heard me say it, but the exorbitant privilege and exorbitant duty of the United States. By being the world reserve currency, the US is able to uniquely benefit from the peaks and troughs, if you know, like, when the world economy is doing really well, the US economy is doing incredibly well. When the global economy is doing shit, so is the US. Now, you might argue that one is it's cause and effect, one side affects the other, vice versa. But ultimately, the US economy doesn't have quite the same ability to navigate if the whole global economy is affected because of, say, COVID or something like that, or an issue that isn't driven by purely US or economic means. Bottom line is that if the Iranians want to continue to put pressure on the Strait of Hormuz in such a way, that will disproportionately affect the US economy. So the exorbitant duty of being the reserve currency becomes that much worse. And we've seen this being mentioned by certain economic types within the MAGA camps or Trump's own administration, simply saying that maybe it's not worth the isolationists, the one who want the US to internalize, drop the whole responsibility of interference, which, I don't blame. We don't want to be going to wars with people unnecessarily or whatever at all. But in the sense of, like, the US has benefited from being in this unique position of the reserve currency and everything, because it means the economy can grow, it can get so much better prices, its exports are really competitive, etc., etc. So if Iran continues to put this pressure on this in this area, inch it up, it's like a pressure valve. They can just turn it up as little or as much as they want, incrementally. That causes huge implications for the US, but delayed, right? Part of the issue that a lot of people don't seem to realize in Trump's camps are the economic headwinds or the economic implications of this war are not going to be felt right away. And all this idea that the US economy is immune is complete nonsense. Is it as badly affected as, say, Europe in some ways? No, it has its own oil reserves and stuff. But it's not only about energy. It's about other raw materials or secondary, those that have gone through the primary they're not in their primary, from the primary sector, I can think of the word, right? They're no longer just primary through the manufacturing. They've been manufactured and then they're having to come back into the US. That is going to be hugely expensive. I'm already seeing this. We're already seeing this in certain industries, I think in agriculture in certain areas, fertilizer, obviously. But it's more like sort of actual items, ones that have had to be manufactured from the raw materials, which the US says, yes, it has the raw materials, but it doesn't have the manufacturing capabilities in-house. And so ultimately, it eats back into the US economy and ultimately the US consumer, taxpayer, and so on. And, Trump may be well aware of this and wants to re-establish US manufacturing, but that's not going to happen over a few months. That's more than one administration's term of reallocation. Like that's a structural shift you have to spend years doing. And this war is not going to last that long. So bottom line, all I'm saying is that the nuclear option for the Iranians is the Strait of Hormuz, but in a way that I think so many Americans, or specifically MAGA types, have really not understood, because they don't know economics. They don't understand just how integrated the US economy is, and therefore how beneficial it has been, how much of a beneficiary it has been from the overall system since 1945, or since Bretton Woods, 1970s, globalization, and how much this war with Iran is really going to hurt them, and already is, but will even more once we see longer down the supply chain or value-added chain or whatever, the implications of this. And the more that Trump tries to squeeze the Iranians through maximalist demands, the more the Iranians can be like, okay, well, we're just going to stand back and yeah, but yeah, anyway, you've had commercials. Oh, there shouldn't be commercials on this. Sorry, guys, I'll get rid of the commercials. There shouldn't be commercials on the streams. Don't know why that's happening. But yeah, anyway, that was my point. Was simply that I think the Strait of Hormuz is really the area that's going to linger, even if these two establish some kind of deal, even if they establish some kind of agreement, it's going to be a long-standing implication for the United States, and this will go into the next administration. So were Trump to win, or MAGA to win again, his successor will have to sort of try to explain why inflation is so sticky, why it's been so unresolvable. Right? Trump likes to claim that he helped with the massive economic growth, but a lot of that was carryover from Obama's administration in his first term. But yeah, anyway, guys, I don't really know what happened to Trita, to be honest. I'm looking at my emails here, and it was pretty clear. We said 9 p.m. today, 9 p.m. being UK time. So he even suggested 4 ET. But yeah, he never replied. So I guess, sorry about that, guys. I was looking forward to speaking with him, but you got 25-30 minutes of me and some adverts, which I will get rid of. I don't know why they've been introducing the adverts on live streams. That shouldn't be the case. Bottom line, guys, I would say that the war is not going anywhere. We're in a situation which is going to remain incredibly volatile. And those of us struggling in terms of daily living costs is going to be the most felt. But ultimately, Trump is not going to win this one because it's just his ego versus an entire system, and an entire system being driven by its single biggest motivation, which is its survival, its retention of power. So this is, it's just the same old merry-go-round, right? I'll end as I started. This is it's just a merry-go-round, right? We're just every day we wake up. Oh, there's been a couple of airstrikes. Oh, that someone's blown something up. Oh, Trump's threatening to end the deal. Oh, the Iranians are going to leave the deal. It's just the same walkabout, really. It's just the same merry-go-round. And place your bets, really. Who's going to give in first? And nothing burger. Exactly. I hate that expression. That's why I don't really talk about it. But as you see, I've largely focused on the Iran war in the past couple of months because it's been so intense. But as things slow down, or just sort of plateau a little bit, I'm trying to diversify again towards Iran, Russia, and the US and China. I'm trying to do more on the strategic competition between the US and China because a lot of you expressed interest in that, but also because I think it underpins so much else of what we're seeing around us right now. And yeah, we'll be actually interviewing on Wednesday. Exciting guests coming up on Wednesday. Senator Mark Kelly will be on the program. So those of you who really love your senators, or you just love what Senator Mark Kelly stands for, he was a former astronaut, actually, which is quite cool. But we're going to be speaking with him. And yeah, we've got some other quite big guests coming on. As always, we try to be as wide-ranging in the perspectives that we host. If there's anyone that you want to hear from particularly, then let me know in the comments. But otherwise, guys, thanks for watching. Do give the stream a like. And if you're new here, for whatever reason you've managed to survive the ads, then subscribe. But otherwise, thanks all for watching. We'll speak soon. See you tomorrow. Take care.